The rain-soaked highway stretched endlessly under the veil of night. Streetlights glimmered faintly through the mist, their halos dissolving into the darkness. It was 3:14 a.m. when David Carter, a weary taxi driver with tired eyes and a heavier heart, caught sight of a lone figure ahead, barefoot, dressed in white, standing under a flickering street lamp like a secret the night was keeping. David rolled down the window, his voice cautious. "Sir, you okay out here?" The man turned slowly, meeting his gaze with eyes deep enough to drown in silence. He nodded gently, without a word. He opened the back door and slid into the seat. The air inside the taxi changed, denser, heavier, charged. "Thank you for stopping," he said, his voice soft yet commanding. David glanced at him through the mirror. "Not safe out here this late. Were you headed?" "Wherever you're going." The words hung in the air, unsettling and calming at once. Even the hum of the engine seemed quieter. For miles they rode in silence. Rain tapped gently against the windows like whispered secrets. David finally asked, "What's your name?" The man's reflection in the mirror softened as he replied, "Jesus." The name cracked something inside him. Memories came flooding back. His wife's laughter, his son's first steps, the night of the accident. He gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles pale. "You've been carrying pain too long," Jesus said softly. "It's time to let it go." David's chest ached. How could he know? How can anyone know? Jesus asked David to stop at a small roadside chapel. Its old wooden doors creaked, and faint golden light spilled through stained glass. Inside, silence ruled. David sank into front pew, head bowed, tears wetting his palms. He whispered words he hadn't said in years. "Forgive me. Help me. I can't carry this anymore." And for the first time in so long, he felt lighter. David remained kneeling on the cold wooden floor, his hands trembling as he pressed them together so tightly his knuckles turned white. The chapel smelled faintly of wax and damp stone. Every breath carried the dust of forgotten prayers. The silence inside was so heavy it seemed to press against his chest, leaving him gasping. The only sound came from outside, the soft, steady patter of rain against the roof, droplets trickling down the stained glass windows like tears. The storm was not violent. It was sorrowful, almost as though the heavens themselves were grieving with him. David's voice cracked, breaking the stillness. "I don't even know how to pray anymore," he whispered. His words were swallowed by the high ceiling, echoing back to him like confessions repeated in an empty room. For a long moment, he felt as though he was speaking to no one, that his voice would die alone in the rafters. But then he sensed movement, not footsteps, not a shift of air, but something deeper, a presence leaning closer without making a sound. The faint light from the stained glass pulsed, golden and red, painting across the bench like the beating of a heart. He felt it before he dared to turn his head, a weightless calm wrapping around him. And then, from behind, a voice broke the silence. "You don't need perfect words." David's throat closed, his breath catching. "You only need to open the door." Slowly, he lifted his tear-filled eyes toward the altar, the colors of the stained glass bending and trembling through his vision. His voice was raw. "Open the door to what?" The answer came with the gentleness of a hand brushing dust from a wound. "To forgiveness, to healing, to yourself." David's body shook as he dropped his head into his palms. A sob tore through him, muffled against his skin, and another followed. The pain he had buried for years, the nights of silence, the guilt he refused to face, the shadow of his wife's final day, came pouring out like a flood breaking through a dam. And then, in that flood of anguish, he felt a touch, a hand resting firmly on his shoulder. It was neither heavy nor fleeting. It was steady, warm, and alive. He dared not look, but he didn't need to. The strength in that touch said everything words could not. You've carried this burden long enough. The voice whispered close to him. Let it fall. The storm outside grew louder for a heartbeat, rain thrumming harder against the chapel's roof, as if echoing his release. David gasped, his sobs transforming into deep, broken breaths. His chest rose and fell with a rhythm unfamiliar, not strangled by grief, but guided by release. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to breathe, and in that breath, he felt something shift, not outside, not around him, but within him. A fracture where light began to pour in, a weight slipping from his shoulders, leaving his body trembling not from exhaustion, but from the terrifying freedom of feeling whole again. The candles on the altar flickered suddenly, as though stirred by an invisible wind. David lifted his head, his face wet with tears, and for a moment he thought he saw a glow brighter than any candle filling the space behind him. Not harsh, not blinding, but alive. The kind of light that carries warmth into the marrow of your bones. His voice broke into a whisper, cracked but sincere. Forgive me, help me, I can't carry this anymore. And in the sacred silence that followed, for the first time in years, David realized he no longer had to. David remained on his knees for a long time, his hands pressed tightly together, breathing in the scent of melted wax and old wood. The simple roadside chapel was bathed in a soft golden glow, the flickering candlelight breathing shadows across the walls. It was quiet, so quiet that the silence felt alive, almost sacred. Finally, he rose slowly. His knees ached, but something inside him had shifted. The crushing weight he'd carried for years no longer felt the same. Part of it had stayed there on the cold wooden floor beneath the small wooden cross. At the far end of the pews, Jesus stood near the last bench, his figure framed by the warm light of the stained glass windows. He said nothing at first. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. David turned toward him, his voice trembling. Why me? Why now? Why appear to me? Jesus stepped forward, his robe moving softly as if the air around him had its own quiet rhythm. His eyes held a calmness that both disarmed and unsettled. Because it's time to come home, he said gently. David frowned, his voice breaking. Home, he hesitated. I don't have a home anymore. My son hasn't spoken to me in years. I lost everything, even my faith. Jesus placed a steady hand on his shoulder, warm and grounding. You've lost things, David, but you haven't lost a way, and you've never walked it alone. The words rippled through him like thunder rolling far away. At that moment, the rain outside slowed to a whisper. The silence deepened. David closed his eyes, and suddenly, the past came rushing back. He saw flashes. His wife's laughter filling the kitchen, his young son running barefoot across the backyard, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning, and then the cold hospital room, the beeping machines, the last phone call he never returned. A single tear slipped down his cheek. My son, he whispered. Jesus' gaze softened, and his voice lowered to something more intimate, almost like a promise. There's still time. They stepped out of the chapel together. The night air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. In the distance, thunder murmured softly, but above them, the clouds were finally beginning to break. Through the gaps, faint threads of starlight cut across the sky. David inhaled deeply, filling his lungs as though breathing for the first time in years. Inside the taxi, the engine purred low as he gripped the steering wheel. In the rear-view mirror, Jesus sat quietly in the back seat, gazing out the window, his profile bathed in the faint glow of the dashboard lights. The ride was silent for several minutes, the softest of tires on wet asphalt the only sound. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It felt full, alive, complete. Then Jesus spoke without looking away from the horizon. When pain meets forgiveness, you will find your son. David's throat tightened. He wanted to ask how. He wanted answers, guarantees, something solid to hold on to. But deep inside, he understood some things can't be explained, only lived. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine. The distant hum of crickets blended with the soft rumble of the taxi's engine as it rolled slowly along the empty road. The night felt quieter now, almost reverent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. David's fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel. The words still echoed in his mind. When pain meets forgiveness, you will find your son. After a few miles, Jesus spoke softly, his voice carrying a weight that made David instinctively slow down. Stop here. David eased a taxi onto the shoulder of the road, just beside an old roadside diner whose flickering neon sign bathed the pavement in a pale, trembling light. The soft sound of dripping water from a roof was the only thing breaking the silence. He inhaled deeply, trying to steady his breath, then turned slowly to look at the back seat. It was empty. The leather seat was smooth, untouched, as if no one had been sitting there at all. David blinked, confused, his chest tightening. He turned fully now, scanning the shadows inside the car, his voice breaking in a whisper. Jesus? Nothing. The only answer came from the distant hum of the neon sign and the faint rustle of wind outside. Then on the seat, he noticed a small folded note. His trembling hand reached for it, the paper soft and still warm as though just placed there. David unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was steady, deliberate, almost timeless. The light you give will always find its way back to you. For a long moment, David sat frozen, the note in his hands, his reflection trembling in the windshield. He felt his breath hitch as a wave of something unfamiliar rose in his chest. Not fear, not confusion, peace. His lips parted, and in a broken whisper he said, "Thank you." David started the engine again. The soft purr filled the silence as he steered the taxi back onto the road. Ahead, the first threads of dawn began to spread across the horizon, staining the clouds in hues of gold and rose. A new day had begun, and inside him so had a new life. The road stretched endlessly before him, its wet asphalt glowing beneath the first kiss of sunlight. The air smelled of rain and pine, crisp and alive. Birds had begun to stir in the distance, their faint songs mixing with the soft hum of the taxi's engine. David drove slowly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile beauty of the moment. His hand rested on the folded note on the passenger seat, its words echoing within him like a heartbeat. The light you give will always find its way back to you. He glanced at the horizon where gold melted into rose, the sky unveiling itself in quiet splendor. For the first time in years, David felt the weight on his chest dissolve completely. It wasn't that life had suddenly become simple, nor that his wounds had magically disappeared. It was something deeper, something quieter. He had changed. A memory surfaced. His son's laughter when he was small, the way he used to climb into the front seat of the car, pointing at every passing cloud. For years, David had replayed the failures, the missed birthdays, the distance he had built with his own silence. But now, for the first time, he dared to imagine something different. A phone call, a meeting, a hug that could bridge the years. The thought didn't scare him anymore. As he drove, a soft breeze slipped through the slightly open window, carrying the scent of wet earth and wildflowers. He breathed deeply, filling his lungs and his soul. Everything felt new. He realized something profound. Life doesn't wait for us to be ready. It waits for us to let go. Forgiveness wasn't a gift he needed from anyone else. It was something he had finally given to himself. And in that surrender, he found the freedom to love again, to hope again, to try again. The sun rose higher, flooding the world with light. David smiled, a real smile, not the tired mask he had worn for years. Somewhere out there, his son was waking up to the same dawn. And though they were miles apart, David knew the light he carried would find its way back. He tightened his grip on the wheel, whispered softly into the morning air, "I'm coming home." The taxi rolled forward, disappearing into the golden horizon. Sometimes, the most profound miracles are not the ones that change the world around us, but the ones that change us from within. Forgiveness is the bridge that connects who we were with who we're meant to become. And no matter how lost we think we are, the light we give will always find its way back to us.